Hey YouTube, it's Ali. Welcome to the channel. God, blimey, is it hot here in the UK. I hope it's hot and warm where you are, and I hope you guys are safe too. Anyway, today we are looking at, what did we do last time? Last time we looked at winning conditions, different ways in which players can win, different ways you can build in design mechanisms to allow a player to win. Well, today we're going to expand upon that, and we're going to be looking at how to end your game. That's it, how to cut the end of your game at a particular point. And we're going to be looking at 7 different ways of doing that. Count them, 7 different ways in which you can end your game. Now, I want to just call out before we start, I am talking about how to end your game here, not when to end your game. Because when and exactly how long a game should last, well, guess what? That's the topic of yet another video later on in the future. But for today, 7 different ways of ending your game. Oh, just before we kick off, I want to say that there's no reason why you can't use more than one ending mechanism in your game here. In fact, a lot of successful games nowadays do that. You'll find lots of games have multiple ways in which the game ends. And sometimes that can add to the tension and the drama of the game. It can actually become part of the strategy. Are you going to try to do a particular thing to end it in this way, or are you going to try to do something else to end it that way? And maybe you're in a race with someone else to do that. Anyway, point I was trying to make there is there could be multiple ways, so you can use more than one of these in your game designs if you want. Let's kick off with the very first one though. One of the most common ways of ending a game is by using fixed rounds. Now, what I mean by that is basically you play a certain number of rounds and then the game ends. So often it's the 7th round. I don't know why, but it generally is 7th round. So what I like about this, what do I like about this? Well, what I like is the fact that you can add strategy and a little bit more tension and engagement by building your game around the rounds. For example, you might say that after the 3rd round, a particular resource no longer becomes available. Or maybe after the 5th round, a part of the board that wasn't available does become available. Maybe on the 6th round, a new deck emerges and you can start grabbing from that. Though 6th round is probably too late. But the point is you can add different elements of strategy into your board game by breaking things out on different rounds. Pretty good, huh? I also like the fact that usually it builds tension towards the last round, where a lot of things, a lot of engine building, a lot of activities you might be pursuing or quest hunting might climax, if that's the right word, on that last round. You better make it work before then, otherwise, thump, game is done. Now, I did mention that you've got to have a way of tracking this. In the older games, I think, once again, you would have a separate tracker to show you what round you're in. But really good games, really clever games make use of that track. Or in fact, don't even have that track present, but have a mechanism in place instead, which alludes to the round you're in. A good example is Architects of the West Kingdom, which we just played recently, actually. There you have King's Orders that are revealed each round. By simply revealing and looking down and checking to see which cards are revealed, which King's Orders are present, you can work out very quickly how many rounds you've got left. So good way of implementing the round counting structure without actually ruining or adding to your game, I should say. Yeah, so first one, fixed rounds. Pretty decent. I'm a big fan of fixed rounds, I think. Similar to fixed rounds are fixed events. So the game has a number of events. Perhaps they're published on cards, perhaps they're not, but they're revealed as the game is played. After a certain number of events, the game ends. Now, this is often used in cooperative games, and games like Forbidden Island, for example, where the event is the flooding of the island. There are, I think, as I recall, 3 cards that have flooding of the island, though, of course, I think that changes depending on the level of challenge you want. But as soon as the 3rd card usually is revealed, the island's flooded and you're out. The game, everyone loses and the game is over. What I do like about this again is that you can add tension because you don't quite know when those events are going to be revealed, especially if they are completely random in the deck. But of course you don't have to make them random. You can have them at set periods of time. Even better than that, you can in fact have players influence when those event cards are going to exist. Now, off the cuff, I can't think of an example of that, and I apologize, but if you can think of one, stick it in the comments below and let me know. I was thinking of something along the lines of, you might have 3 decks that the players draw from. Each deck has an event card, and the player chooses which deck to draw from. If the player can add back into the deck, well, then he's pushing that likelihood of the event appearing further and further away. Just a little bit of sort of idle thinking there about how you could design a mechanism in place there. Now, event cards are great. I do like having random event cards and then ending the game based on it. But a quick word of warning, I think if you've got a game that has quite a complex strategy or allows players to build up an engine of some kind, then I'm not sure event cards or ending your game based on events being revealed without the players being able to control that is a good idea. Because if you have an event card turning up that it ends the game and the player hasn't had a chance to build their engine or develop their strategy, well, the game's going to feel a little unrewarding and quite harsh. So, quick word of warning, I think this works well on cooperative games, this kind of ending mechanism. But if you are going to include it with an engine builder or a complex strategy for the players to develop, you need to allow them to control exactly, or have some control when that event is going to appear. Oh, I have just been talking about event cards. I just point out, games like Pandemic, of course, the game ends without the use of cards. So there, I think if you have a certain number of outbreaks, the game ends. So you don't have to have cards. But there you go, events. Events is my second way. Random events could, in fact, signal the end of your game. Third on my list is fixed cards. Now again, this is sort of similar to events and to number of rounds, but here we're talking about working, especially if you're, well, only if your game uses cards, having a certain number of cards that you run through before the game ends. Usually I'm talking about a deck. You have a deck, you call and play from the deck until the deck runs out and then the game's over. Now, again, this is a pretty decent way of being able to tell how long a game lasts simply by looking at the deck. So that came out wrong. What I meant to say there is you don't really need a tracker. That's what I'm trying to say. You don't need a tracker because you can quickly look at the deck and see how far into the game you are. Now, what I do like about this is once again, you can enable the players to manipulate the deck. And a really good example of that is in the Agatha Christie card game, Murder on the Cards, or is it called Death on the Cards? It is called Death on the Cards. There we go. I did a review on it, for crying out loud. Of course it's called Death on the Cards. Now, here, one of you is the murderer. And the way the game's orchestrated is if you get through that deck of cards, then you as the murderer escape. So the murderer will escape once the deck is over. So not only does it give you the ending condition, i.e. the deck's used up, but it also gives you the winning condition for one of the players, because they'll escape and win. What I like about this is the mechanics of the game allow you to take or force people to take cards from that deck. If you're the murderer, then you're going to be trying to get everyone else to take cards from that deck rather quickly. And that in itself brings out this whole little sort of accusation and suspicion kind of element up, which I think the designers were absolutely aiming for and achieve through the use of running through the deck. I think that made sense. I hope it did. But anyway, the point is, running through a deck is a great way of determining exactly when your game ends, but it does allow for you to manipulate that, of course, simply by allowing players to either determine the rate at which they're running through or adding cards back into the deck. Oh my God, adding cards back into the deck to make them bigger. That's pretty neat as well. Anyway, plenty of opportunities there to determine the end of your game simply by how quickly you run through a deck of cards. On to exhausting resources then, because we talked about cards, and cards could be classed as a kind of resource. But when I talk about resources, I mean things that players are using to either buy actions or buy activities in the game, or buy goods or whatever in the game. Again, exhausting resources I see fundamentally used a lot in non-competitive games, i.e. cooperative games. Games like Pandemic. If you run out of cubes in Pandemic, the game ends. But you can also use it in a competitive game. Games like Ticket to Ride, where each player actually has a number of little carriages. of their own color. They start off with a set number of those carriages, and when you get down to 0 or 2 of them, the game ends. Now, the thing I like about this is that it adds an element of strategy to the player as to whether they should be using those resources, because if they use them too quickly and don't amass enough points before they've used all their resources up, well, the game will end, but they may not win. So there's a little bit of debate as to whether I should be, as a player, using my resources to make this large link between place A and place B in Ticket to Ride, as I'm using this example, or whether I should be sort of breaking it up and going for sort of smaller links that give me perhaps a few less points, but extend the game a little. The point I'm trying to get across is that using resources, perfectly good way of determining the end of a game. What I like about it, as I stress, is that it also enables a player to have some decision around whether they want to end the game early or late. So the actual ending of the game, down to them in one way. If exhausting resources is about taking away what you have in the game, then completing tasks is about building upon what you have in a game to achieve certain specific predetermined goals. Goals like connecting from one side of the board to the other side of the board in Azul or Tic-Tac-Toe or Connect 4, or maybe curing all disease like in Pandemic. I've used that quite a few times today, haven't I, Pandemic? Anyway, I must play that. But the point is, there are achievable goals that you can do to trigger an end event. Now, what I like about this is that those events or those actions that you need to carry out don't need to be declared necessarily until you've completed them. So games where you have hidden agendas, there's a Discworld game that I can't quite remember the name of which, but I'll try to put it in comments below, or I'll put it in writing here somewhere, where you actually, each player has a separate action they need to complete. If they complete that action, they win the game. What I like about this is that you don't have to declare that you've completed even part of that action until you complete the whole. So not only as a player do you not know when the game's going to end, but you don't actually know how well you're doing until that time. Now, some designers are going to love this, others are going to hate it. Personally, I think it's pretty decent. Now, so far, we've been talking about games with a variable length of actual gameplay. Even though we know that the game's going to end after 7 rounds, we don't necessarily know how long those 7 rounds are going to last. Well, there is a way of even dealing with that, and that is by using elapsed time as your winning condition, or as your ending condition. There we go, as your ending condition. Now, elapsed time simply means that you've allotted a certain amount of time within which you have to play the game from start to finish. After that time, the game's over. So if the game says it's going to be an hour long, the game's going to be an hour long. Escape kind of games really benefit from this kind of ending mechanism. Games like Escape from Colditz, or I think the Temple Escape game. I'm terrible with names today, but I'll remember it and stick it underneath here, here probably somewhere. Those are good examples of elapsed time. Now, the obvious challenge is you've got to find a way of the players being able to record and track the time. Now, you can just do something simple here, like have a clock or a giant egg timer. But the really clever games, they incorporate those into the game. When I was young, I played a game called Atmosphere, which I'm hoping some of you will remember. It came with a VHS cassette that you would put in and play. And it was the length of that VHS cassette that determined how long your game was, which was really clever. There are other examples. I think the Curse of the Temple, that was it. Curse of the Temple, I looked away there to check. But Curse of the Temple actually has a soundtrack that plays. That's really got the benefit of adding those ambient noises as well. So as you play the game, you're really getting into it, really getting into the feel and the player experience of trying to escape from a temple. Now, one quick word of warning here on the elapsed time mechanism for determining when your game ends, and that is your game has to be pretty simple and very well understood by all players before the game starts. What you don't want is to spend time during your game having to either stop a clock or simply take up the game time by explaining rules over and over again to someone, because they're quite complex. So if you're going to build a game that uses elapsed time, the game's got to be pretty simple to understand. The other thing I would draw attention to is if it's a game that uses elapsed time but has one player or one group of players stopping another player or another group of players, you need to make sure that time wasting doesn't become a tactic. What you don't want is your game to rely on someone just taking an awful long time to take their turn and therefore wasting time, shortening the game in effect, rather than actually playing a strategy to win. So just bear that in mind. And finally, we're going to talk about the winning condition. This is my seventh possibility, and it's built into your winning condition. So if you've used either tug of war, player elimination, or the race as a mechanism for determining who wins your game, well, you've got a built-in mechanism for ending the game too. So for example, in Snakes and Ladders, if you get to the last square, you've won the race, but you've also triggered the end of the game. So nice and straightforward, very commonly used, but I thought I'd leave it to last because the others, quite frankly, are a little bit more interesting. Well guys, that's the end of my list. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful and inspirational and perhaps even entertaining. If you did, let me know by giving me a thumbs up on this video. Maybe subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff about board game design and design techniques. I have got a couple of interviews coming up. I'm just going to go through and edit them, so stay tuned if you like that kind of stuff. And I've got a really special guest coming up. Actually, they're all special, but this guy wrote to me out of the blue, and I was incredibly thankful that he did, because he then agreed to come on to the show. So we are going to have a chat with him later on. But in the meantime, I want you all to enjoy the sun if you have it. God blimey, is it hot over here in the UK. And try to stay safe and away from that nasty virus. For now though, and for, as always, take care guys.